want to come to my school, send a coffee every day. Just let me know. I'm going to come back to something more mundane, which is a look at the reform agenda that we've been experiencing for the last 4 or 5 years in New York State. Before you all run for the doors, I think it's important to get a look at a series of events that have happened, which will better, I think, help us understand what's going on now and where we're headed. If we go back, the first shot across the bow, if you will, was the state running into a problem with their own budget. There was a $10 billion deficit back in 2009, 2010. And the way they were going to solve this deficit was to get money from other places. So they passed a law, the Deficit Reduction Act, and the next year, in 2010, 2011, they took $2.5 billion statewide from aid to schools all across the state. That was going to partially fill that gap. And it's called the Gap Elimination Adjustment. If you haven't heard of it, it's because nobody's talking about it. It's called the GEA, the Gap Elimination Adjustment. Now, over the past 4 years, from then till now, that aid that was taken every year amounts to something like $7.4 billion that schools across the state have had taken away from them. This past year, I didn't realize there are people from other districts, but in the Northport, East Northport district, you lost $1.9 million. Cumulatively, the 4-year loss for you was $9.1 million. Now, less affluent school districts have borne the brunt of the GEA. Comsewogue is less affluent. And we lost $3.1 million last year, this present year, 14-15. Cumulatively, about $16 million. The governor did not mention any restoration of the gap money in his proposed budget. Not a dime. He has a $4 billion surplus, remember. The school districts on Long Island have lost more than $1.2 billion over these last 4 years. 4 billion, 1.2 billion. Doable. But instead, his proposal in his budget was to take $3 billion of that $4 billion for infrastructure projects. He said, well, that's important. 95% of the money is going upstate. Long Island's getting 5% of it, about $161 million. Don't think he likes us. It might be mutual. The second piece of this reform agenda is the whole Common Core initiative, which I can only charitably describe as a mess. In January of 2011, the New York State Board of Regents adopted the Common Core state standards, and they were implemented in New York State schools the following year, 2012-2013. And what they said was this, and this is a quote: the Common Core standards were created through a collaborative effort on behalf of the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, don't know what that is, and the Council of Chief State School Officers. The standards were developed by key stakeholders in the field, including teachers, school administrators, and content experts. Not one K-12 educator was involved in this process. So they had some teachers, I don't know what they were teaching, but nobody in public education, K-12, was involved in the development of those standards. So it was implemented in 2012, September. In March, April of that year, the kids were tested on it, 5 months into the year. The children, as you heard, were subjected to 4.5 hours testing for ELA, 4.5 hours for math, special ed students up to 9 hours for each of those subjects. The medical college admission test is 4.5 hours long. What do you think? So what were the results? Well, let me go back. I'll talk about Comsewogue. When I took over as superintendent in 2010-2011, 90% of the students in the district were proficient grades 3 through 8 in ELA and math. The next, Commissioner Steiner was the commissioner at the time. He thought that was the percentage was too high. So we changed the passing score. When I was a kid, I grew up in Flatbush, and you had what was called, you play stickball. And depending how many people we had, we'd make up the rules that day. I don't know if Commissioner Steiner ever played stickball, but those are stickball rules. If you don't like the results, you change the passing score. So that was 2011-12. Now 2012-2013, the first year of the assessments being given, 30% roughly statewide passed the test. Surprising? Not really, because in January of 2013, I received an email from then Commissioner King, where he told us he wasn't expecting more than about a third of the students to pass the test. That's quite an expectation. Imagine going to a doctor. We talked about a doctor before Mola did. Imagine going to a doctor and he said, now just, he takes your medical history and then he says, look, I don't really expect more than about a third of my patients to live. You'd say, Doc, I left something in the car. The second year, last year, about 35% passed. Not surprisingly, we were told that there would be incremental improvements in the passing rate. So let's figure out how this could happen. How could the commissioner know that 30% would pass that first year? I don't know if anybody can be that good a predictor. The passing score is determined, first of all, well after the tests are given. That's one way, you know. It's called finagling where I came from. The passing score is engineered to have X% of students pass. The passing score is engineered to have massive numbers of students fail. 70% roughly the first time, 65% the second time. Any program that's designed to have 60 or 70% of the students involved in it fail is abusive. Period. Two things. Given that 5% incremental improvement, a third grader right now could conceivably go through his or her entire career in elementary and middle school and never pass a state test. That sends a clear message to that kid. You're done. And the second thing, which is more significant in many ways, is that proficiency is no longer an indication of student learning. Rather, it's part of a broader political agenda. So that's the second piece of the reform. The tax cap is the third piece. The tax cap came in, the governor said this was in June 2011. It was supposed to be coupled with relief from mandates. If you remember, the governor put together a mandate commission. Whenever I hear commission, I know not much is going to happen. But you hope. The mandate commission couldn't come up with one. Not a dime in mandate relief. Instead, more mandates were piled on, along with a cap. In our district, $5.5 million are unfunded or underfunded mandates. And they're increasing. There has been no mandate relief. The fourth piece of the reform agenda is the annual professional performance review, which you heard a little bit about. That was 2012. Busy time, 2011-12. How much could we mess this whole thing up? You couldn't do this by accident. Okay? At the time, it was 40% roughly was going to be based on some kind of assessment, state assessments or others. And 60% observations. Districts had to submit their plans to the state education department, sit down, negotiate with their teachers associations, with their administrators associations, get these plans in by July the 15th, or you're going to lose some state aid. We will have lost $600,000. That certainly puts a little pressure on negotiating, doesn't it? By all parties. Because it's not like, well, if a district loses $600,000, the teachers and administrators aren't. It's one pocket. So we submitted the plans. The plans were reviewed, revised, and ultimately approved by the state education department. So contrary to the governor's surprise about how these plans were constructed, nonsensical. Every one of us had to submit them. We had to sit through hours of revision meetings, and then they were finally approved. By law, and again, this is from the description in the memo from State Ed, the APPR is required to be a significant factor in employment decisions such as promotion, retention, tenure determinations, terminations period, and supplemental compensation, as well as a significant factor in teacher and principal professional development, as well as is less important than the first one. This is about employment decisions. I thought the primary purpose of any evaluation system was to improve practice. The governor's budget uses now, in his budget proposal, he says we're going to go 50-50. So now what's the big deal? 60-40, 50-50. But there's a difference. 50% are going to be on the state tests. Remember those tests that we know how they decide the passing scores? Already I'm not feeling so good. It's like playing three-card Monte. You know you're going to get hurt. You don't know how bad, but you know you're going to get hurt. The other 50% would be other measures, observations, etc. But if you fail to achieve a satisfactory rating in either part, the whole evaluation fails. So given the fact that the tests, those tests, are going to determine 50%, and we know that there's a better than equal chance you're going to get killed here. It's really 100% is based on the evaluations. Smoke and mirrors aside. I went back to my teachers in my district, looked at their test results from 12-13 and 13-14, and applied the governor's 50-50. I would have to have dismissed 6 teachers last year, and another 12 this year. They're good teachers. They're very good teachers. But that doesn't matter. The whole thing depends upon 6 hours of testing in ELA, 6 hours of testing in math, or 9 hours in each. Here's a question. What happens if you're a grade 3 through 8 teacher and you don't teach a subject that has a state test attached to it? That's easy. You get to pick. You're a music teacher, an art teacher, a phys ed teacher, a guidance counselor, tech ed. I'll pick either ELA or math. I'm not making this up. It's almost like a Mel Brooks film, except it's a tragedy. Now, if a teacher receives 2 ineffective ratings in a row, they're fired. If students fail and teachers fail, schools will fail, the individual schools. If you get 3 in a row with an individual school, they're going to send in either a, what do they call it, a turnaround expert. Has nothing to do with ballet. A turnaround expert or a charter school can take you over, or another district could take you over. All contracts would be voided. This is a reform agenda. In the governor's budget presentation in mid-January, he attached all these and other policy issues to the budget for the first time. Usually they're separate, huh? If the legislature now does not pass all of its education proposals, all of them, districts will not get any additional aid. Their aid will be frozen. If the legislature stalls, then the governor, ultimately what will happen is the governor will shut down, just like the federal government did. And the governor in New York State has the authority and the power to just, by executive order, put whatever he wants in there. The governor's proposals will remove local control of our schools. Funding, curriculum, staffing, evaluation, setting policy. They will continue to starve us of resources, bury us with additional required programs, without funding, forcing us to cut programs, reduce staff, increase class sizes, continue an incomprehensible testing program, shrouded in mystery, designed without any input from K-12 educators, child development specialists, without any transparency, without any feedback loop. And now, and it's also, all of this is carefully done to have massive number of students fail. Imagine. And now also to have massive numbers of teachers fired. And ultimately have schools taken over by charter operators or other private people. Clearly, the agenda is to so shape confidence in public education that other alternatives, the charter schools, the vouchers, the privatizing for profit, become more attractive. It is nothing less than the programmatic dismantling of the public education system. And that's not the worst part of this whole thing, believe it or not. The worst part, the most destructive effects, are on our students. In all of the talk from our state and federal leaders, where are the children? Not a word about them. Not a word about what they are experiencing. Students, young students, are discouraged. They doubt themselves. They don't like school. They feel like failures and losers. This is a lesson that they are learning daily, many of them. It's a bad lesson. And our most vulnerable students, students with special needs, English language learners, students with high poverty, are being hurt and discouraged to a greater extent. I believe the measure of who we are as a people or as a society is how we treat the weakest among us. I told this story last year because I heard from Arnie Dodge, who is a brilliant professor. It's about people from East Africa, the Maasai people. You heard it already, you got to hear it again. It's a good story. The Bears people. You've seen the Maasai people, probably on National Geographic specials. They're all tall and thin. I'm envious. They're semi-nomadic. They don't own anything individually, only community. They herd cattle, you've seen. When they greet each other, they ask, and how are the children? Are all of them well? How are the children? Are all of them well? And if the answer comes back, all the children are well, this meant, of course, that peace and safety prevail. All the children are well means life is good. It means the daily struggles of existence, even among poor people, include the proper care of the young and the defenseless. And it's not just their own children. They don't say, how are your children? Are all of the children. They feel a shared responsibility for all of them. So I ask you today, and how are the children? Are all of them well? No. Because the concerns of parents have been systematically ignored by the leadership of the state government and the state education department, parents have taken matters into their own hands. Whatever you wish to call it, the movement to opt out, refuse, or boycott tests, these tests is large, about 60,000 last year or so. And it's growing. I believe that it will only continue to increase. In a number of instances, this has been met with threats and intimidation. This is a fatal error on the part of those who are engaging in those tactics. In fact, rather than intimidating parents, those tactics have had the effect of further angering parents and focusing them like a laser on what they need to do. Nothing will stop parents from protecting their children. We must continue and even redouble our efforts. Our voices must be heard. We must continue asking the question, and how are the children? Are all of them well? Until the answer comes back, yes, all of them are well.